My name is Nobulali Dangazele. I'm a Xhosa young lady, and my family is originally from the Eastern Cape. However, I was born in Soweto in South Africa. The primary reason why my family is no longer living in the village of Ekoboti, which the neighboring town is Xhosa, is primarily because the resources available there are very limited. My mom and dad decided that let's move to the city and let's live in an urban area is because of accessibility. Wi-Fi is something that you dream of in Ekoboti, but here it's easily accessible. But also the quality of education and opportunities that one finds in an urban area versus in the rural areas or even in the townships are very, very vast and very, very different, to the point where one feels like you almost wear two completely different identity caps. Nobulali is my real name, and that's what I'd be called in Soweto or in Xhosa or Ekoboti. But in the urban area, they refer to me as Lali or Lals because it's much easier. And that's also some of the differences between the urban and the rural. For example, when I'm in the Eastern Cape, I wouldn't dress like this, I wouldn't put on makeup, and I certainly wouldn't communicate in English. My mannerism wouldn't be as confident and as outspoken, but you would be expected to be a bit more respectful. Not opinionated or not intelligent, but a bit more respectful. So I think one then embodies different versions or aspects or personas of themselves, still being true to yourself, but understanding the context in which you are in and the content which you can or cannot divulge in that context. I sometimes go home and cook tripe and samp, or sometimes have McDonald's during lunch, and in one day I might have both. So it's also just some of the basic examples of how one has to teleport from being a very, very indigenous, rural, rooted, traditional individual to being an almost Western, sophisticated, altered version of themselves to fit into what the economy requires, but also what your social ecosystem needs as well. I think my success and as well as my career development has been greatly influenced by my geographical placement. Because I was raised in Soweto, there's the Soweto uprisings. So even my parents had a certain expectation that I will be a family revolutionary, and how that was expressed is through the level of education that I get. So a matric is not enough, you need to go to your master's level and a PhD later on. So the expectation that my parents have for me is greater coming from a career and education pathway vis-a-vis my cousin. But in Johannesburg or in the urban area, because of how frantic things are, I sometimes feel like I lose a sense of who I really, really am. Speaking in English now, I'd be much more comfortable speaking in isiZulu or isiXhosa. But because I understand that the language of communication internationally is English, there's a certain limitation that I put on myself just from a language point of view. But also, when I look at my cousin vis-a-vis myself, her quality of life, I sometimes believe, is much better than mine. The water that she drinks is much healthier than mine. The air that she breathes, when she looks to the sky, she can actually see the stars, whereas I can't. However, on an economic level, the disparities are quite big. When one moves from one area to the other, it's almost like the distance that you travel allows for you to unwind and rewind back into who you are. And then when you come back up to Johannesburg, you almost wind your clock up again. And I see it even with time. That side time is very stretched, it's very relaxed, and I get a sense of being centered. So I feel that I've lost that sense of community, and I've lost the sense of being part of a collective. Because in an urban area, it's more about the individual. It's about self-actualization. It's about my goals. It's about my life coach. It's not about, so what would you wish for your family? And it's not about the collective. I've made a promise to myself that I don't want my children to experience the same loss that I've experienced in this urban-rural diaspora. But I really would like for them to be fully engulfed and inculcated in their culture, so that if they choose to go Western, they know what they're leaving behind, rather than just me giving them a Western approach to culture and them not knowing what they're losing out in the end. Post-matriculation, which is our grade 12 in South Africa, I then decided to do an undergraduate degree in drama in dramatic arts. I initially just wanted to become an actress. However, I later found something called applied theatre, and I focused on drama and theatre in education. And what I use that for currently is I lecture at Wits University, where I teach students on how to apply the use of theatre within the education system. So drama meets curriculum, theatre meets curriculum, and this is what Shakespeareans, which is our company, also does. We also take the curriculum as per the Department of Education and try and simplify it for the learners using fun and interactive methodologies based in applied theatre. Post doing my honors degree, I then decided to do my master's, and that really opened up my perception of education. It allowed for me to tackle and battle with some of the theorists and argue that in an African context it's not that easy because we're not as resourced, but also it's sometimes not that simple because we are very complex beings in Africa, because not only is it one culture but an array of different cultures. Not only is it one socio-economic standard but an array of them as well. So it was a lovely experience for me to just interrogate what others have said, mostly Western writers, and look at it through the lens of an African. The question that I get quite a lot is why Shakespeareans, why Shakespeare in an African context? And the reason is, why the internet in an African context? You know, the internet allows for us to be connected, to communicate, as well as to learn. Shakespeare does the same. Shakespeare is universal. The themes found in Shakespeare are very, very relevant in an African context. Othello, for example, is a great example of how an African meets West, succeeds, but also has got an Achilles heel that ends up leading to a tragic end. You look at Romeo and Juliet, and even within the Xhosa culture, which is mine, there is the Mfengus and there's the Mpondomses. I'm the Mpondomses, but my fiance is a Mfengu. And even when we were talking lobola negotiations, that is still something that influences us today. So yes, I am a Juliet, and yes, he is a Romeo, and we still need to negotiate some of the things that they did way back when Shakespeare wrote it. But also, I think being born in Africa doesn't mean that I can't be part of the global village. And that is what I constantly also promote within the organization as well as in school. So one might ask, but Lali, or Nobulali, depending on where I am, how does this cabal of identities and backgrounds and information and how does that feed into what you're doing, where you'd like to go, and how you intend on getting there? And the simple answer is this: as much as a human being is one entity, we consist of a lot of atoms, protons, neutrons, and electrons, cells, blood cells, and all these things that make up the whole. So even with myself and my spirit, I don't see it as a solid individual structure. So, for example, the background of being from the rural Eastern Cape informs some of the work that I do in nature conservation. It informs some of the work that I do in ensuring that cultures are still respected and honored in the work that we do. But also, Shakespeareans is a social enterprise rather than just being a for-profit organization. And the reason for that is because I know where I come from, but I also know where I want to go. The social stands for where I come from and where the need is the most. But the enterprise speaks to where I'd like to go. I do want to accumulate wealth. I do want a better future for my children, but I do also know and acknowledge the responsibility that I have as a South African to where it is that I come from and where it is that I'm going. So the education, in a sense, has given me a roadmap of how these two seemingly dichotomous worlds can merge. Am I putting up my flag and saying, you know what, this is what we're doing in South Africa, and it needs to be noted whether you're in Iceland or in Ireland? So I think it influences me in a great deal, but it gives me so many layers that inform the work that I do. So the challenge is that as a girl, I wasn't fully inculcated in my culture. And now as a woman, there's certain gaps that I have and holes and questions that I can't now answer because my grandparents have passed on and my parents have passed on. So it's almost like I need to recreate this culture for myself. And it's a very uncomfortable position to find yourself in, because you want to inform your children about the heritage that is, so that they can understand the heritage that was and that is to come. But I don't have that. You almost feel like you're a floating hot air balloon with no real grounding. It's difficult, and it saddens me. It really, really does. To stand here, be confident about my education, about my business, about myself, about all these marvelous things, and then you ask me, so what will you do to celebrate your wedding culturally? And I'm like, I really don't know. So it's a lot of development, but the development has come at a great cost as well. and it saddens me. Not about where you come from, but about where it is that you want to go. It might sound like a cliche, but it really is true. I mean, here we've got in South Africa Mandela. If you look at Mandela as a child, there's no way that the Mandela, the adult, can correlate or correspond or relate with those two different identities. But it does, because you educate yourself, you expose yourself, but you also realize that where you are born is not the be-all and end-all of what the world is. So the first thing I would suggest is they travel. And some of the world's solutions don't come because you're in a comfort zone, but they come because you're in a different context to where you normally would be. Newton, had he not been sitting under a tree, would not have discovered what gravity is and then gone on to explore that further. So it's important that people travel, physically travel, but also allow your mind to travel. How you can allow your mind to travel is by reading. And lastly, invest in yourself, because your destiny lies in nobody else's hands but your own.